It was brought to my attention that Tom Hussein Outdoors, I don't know if he designed, I know he didn't design all of the items that are on their web store, but I know that he designed some of them, and I believe this is one of his designs. He's part of the Sharp Talk podcast. Of that merchandise, they have hoodies, coffee mugs, t-shirts, you name it, they have it, male and female, and you can buy it right there. I'll put a link to his Instagram, the Sharp Talk podcast Instagram, and to the store down below. But obviously, Hardness, HRC, has been a pretty big conversation on the folder side of things. Lots of back and forth. Some people even saying, you know, it doesn't even matter how hard a knife's the blade of a knife is, and some people even going as far as to say steel type doesn't even really matter. So that's kind of what's been happening on the folder side of things. Well, recently I've decided to stop using my cheap Walmart Santoku knife that I've had for, God, probably 10 years now, and really step up and buy a real knife. So I was talking with my friend Super Steel Steve. He said, send me 5 knives. I'll kind of sort through them for you and kind of tell you the pros and cons of each one. So we started talking about that. He gave me 2 different options out of the 5 knives I picked. And from there, because I'm the kind of person that I am, I immediately just started diving into the research and just looking at every single thing. And what eventually came up, let me back up. I settled on a Santoku knife, which is a little bit small. Is typically thought of as a knife that because of its size and its weight is more for someone with either small hands or a lady, a woman. So I kind of did, at this point in time, I'm only going to have the one kitchen knife, and I really didn't want to be undergunned, so to speak, in the kitchen. So I ended up doing some more looking, and I found a knife that was the same brand, but it was the style of knife that Steve suggested to me originally, which is a Gyoto knife. And you'll have to forgive me if I mispronounce any of these things. I am not a chef. I'm not even a cook. I'm just a guy that likes to make food at home. So anyway, I ended up stumbling onto this knife right here, which is the Konosuke HD2 Gyoto 240 millimeter with a Western handle. So HD2 is the steel type, 240 millimeters is the blade length, which is about 9.5 inches, and Western style handle refers to the handle type here that you see, which is like your average kitchen knife, and it's not a Japanese style, which is usually more along the lines of like just those plain round-ish shaped wooden handles. And again, I'm generalizing. Again, I'm not telling you guys I'm using all the correct terms, so please save me in the comments. We're just talking in general so everybody can kind of be on the same page. If you're already ahead of us, then ignore what I'm saying and just take it with a grain of salt. So not claiming to be a chef knife expert. But what I noticed as I did more research is every single website that I went to, specifically looking at Japanese style knives, I noticed several things that all of these sites had in common. So if you look down here, one of the first things it talks about is the style of the knife. It talks about the steel type, and then it talks about the hardness of the knife. It further goes on to talk about the angle, the very acute angle, the grind of the blade, fall through food contender, etc., etc., etc. Keep scrolling down to the specs, and you can see it's a laser cut mono steel, which means it's a very thin grind, and it's only made up of one type of steel. It's not sanmai or anything like that. It's not a cladded blade. It talks about the steel type, it talks about the weight, and then it talks about the grind right down here at the edge, which is 50-50. And as I continued to look, and I have a few examples of this, the same thing just happened over and over and over and over again. So here, you can see this is a totally different website. Steel type, blade hardness. It talks about the handle. I'm sure if we go on, it talks more about the steel, etc., etc., etc. It talks about the being able to rock the blade. So blade shape, just lots of talk about the steel type, blade shape, hardness, etc., etc., etc. Here is another example. Another website talks about the blade type. It talks about the hardness, and then again it talks about the geometry at the bevel of the knife. So again, just the same pattern over and over and over and over. And this is the last one I'll show you guys because I think you get the point. Again, it talks about the steel type. It talks about the hardness of the steel, on and on and on and on and on. So I didn't look just at the knife websites. I jumped over to YouTube, and then I started to watch some videos. And there it slapped me in the face again, time and time and time and time again. One of the first videos that I watched, and I put a clip of this on my, I didn't put a clip of this video. I put a clip of a Chef Knives to Go video up on my Instagram page, and it was the same exact thing. It talks about the blade shape. It talks about the blade style, like which type of blade do you want to use. It talks about the blade steel. It talks about the hardness of the steel, on and on and on and on. It's just the same thing over and over and over again. In this video here, how do you choose the perfect knife? And it's talking about kitchen knives, and he goes through all of the different types of knives. He goes through Japanese knives. He goes through the knives that you're more used to, the Western knives, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But if you look at the timestamp down here, hold on a second, I think I lost it. If you look at the timestamps down here, it's the same exact thing. Blade shape, belly, handle, stamped versus forged steel, steel type, face grind, steel type. It talks about a blade, basically that's dealing with the blade type. Does it have the scallops or the those divots, those dips in the blade to release food? And he goes into how that's not always something that happens with blades that have those. Steel type, carbon steel, cladding, powder steel, Swedish, on and on, bevels, accessories, just on and on and on and on and on. So you guys can see here in the knife world, and please go out. I want you guys to look into this stuff. Go out and look into this. Every single time you dig deeper into the kitchen knife side of things, the very first things they're going to talk about, if you have no clue what kind of knife you want, they're going to ask you what type of blade shape what are you planning on doing with the knife? And that's going to determine the blade shape. That's going to determine the blade length. That's going to determine the steel type. That's going to determine the hardness. That's going to determine, all of those things. And all of those things matter because he gives an example in the video I just showed you of someone that works at a meat packing plant. Meat packers, he says, tend to prefer softer knives because they have to work on a line and they don't have time to go over to a stone and sharpen a knife. They need to be able to just hone it real quickly on the line. So they want one of these softer knives so that way they can make a few passes on this honing rod, get their knife back to sharp, and go back to butchering the animals that they need to butcher to keep up with the line speed. He also talks a lot about Western style knives and how Western style knives typically are on the softer side because of the style of cooking that Western chefs have. We are harder on knives. We want to chop through bones. We want to, just kind of bust things up in the kitchen, for lack of a better term. When you have an application like that, you're not going to want a Japanese style knife with a thinner grind and a harder steel, because obviously, like the conversation we have in the folding knife world, if you take a knife that's razor thin behind the edge, is rock hard, and you want to baton through something, you're gonna either snap the blade or you're gonna either blow the edge out. One of the two. It's just not a good combination. That's the other thing that kind of struck me about the kitchen knife world. For whatever reason, in the folder world, seem to lack the perspective that there are different tools for different jobs. There's not one knife that's going to do it all. There are some knives that can be okay at many things, but there is no one knife that does every single task extremely well. So, in the kitchen world, you have specific knives for specific purposes, and those knives have different grinds, they have different blade shapes, they have different hardnesses, the geometry is totally different, on and on and on and on and on. However, like I said, in the folding knife world, we neglect that and we lump everything into one category and we say, oh, if a knife blade is too hard, it's going to chip. Well, yes, if you don't use the knife for its intended purpose or the style it's designed for or the characteristics that that blade has, yes, that would fall under what people like to call abuse. If you use something for something that it is not designed to do well, and then you have a failure, is that a failure on the knife's part or is that a failure on the user's part? And again, in the knife world, it's common knowledge. If you see a knife that has been neglected or the edge is chipped, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, they look at the chef. They don't look at the knife. They say clearly this knife was meant for X purpose, you used it for Y purpose, and you got the results you got. You were negligent in your use. The tool is not bad, the chef is negligent in their use. So it's just very interesting to me that we've had many different conversations about some things. And in the kitchen knife world, there's just a general understanding of certain facts. You need certain blade grinds for certain tasks. You need certain steel types for certain tasks. Certain steel types serve you better in certain tasks. I guess that's a better way to put it. And hardness absolutely matters when you have a knife. These are just all generally accepted facts that, like I said, I want you guys to go out and look at and come back and tell me, comment down below. The last thing I want to say in closing is this even carries over to the accessories. Once you get into the kitchen knife world, pretty much, majority of the people that are serious, that are buying these higher end knives, like the knives I showed you, they're sharpening those knives themselves. And when you start even looking at the types of stones that people use, one of the first things they talk about is the hardness of the stone and how hard a blade can be before that stone is not effective for that type of stone. Example, there are several soaking stones that are on the softer side of the range, whatever, the range for stones is. Again, I'm not going to get into too much detail. I'm not an expert. Go out there, look, verify. If you find something that's not matching up with what I'm saying, come back and tell me. But generally, there's a range of hardness of stones, and there's flash and go stones, there's soaking stones, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, some of the soaking stones are on the softer side of the scale, and they'll tell you that if you sharpen a knife that is over 61, 62 Rockwell, you're probably going to gouge that stone at some point in time, especially if you have poor technique, because the stone is too soft for that harder knife. So even there, they're telling you that hardness matters not only just for the knife, but for the sharpening stones that you're going to use, and you have to match everything up accordingly. You'll hear them talk about how a stone cuts based on the steel type, how a stone cuts based on the steel hardness, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's amazing the generally accepted facts that occur in the kitchen world that for some reason are debated in the folding knife world. I guess I was taken aback. It was very interesting to me to see an entire group of people that are just like, well, yeah, the blade grind matters. Well, yeah, the hardness of the blade matters. Well, this works better at this. Well, this works better at that. Of course, you don't want to use this for this. You want to use this for that. It's just, do some research, guys. Look over on that side of things, and I think we'd be better served carrying some of those principles back over here to the folding world. One other thing that I wanted to mention, and I know I said that I was done after I talked about the accessories. One other thing I thought was very interesting about the kitchen knife world, it doesn't matter if you're looking at a $12 Walmart knife or you're looking at a $500 handmade Japanese knife. In the kitchen world, another generally accepted trend is pick the knife that works for you. The knife that works for you is not necessarily going to work for me, and it's great if that $12 knife serves your purposes, wonderful. If the $500 knife serves your purposes, beautiful. For whatever reason, we also don't have that in the folding knife world. If you don't pick the exact knife that somebody else has picked, or if you don't like a knife that somebody else likes, it's all of a sudden an issue. And I think we forget every person is different, Every hand is different, every budget is different, every use case is different. And for each use case, there may be a knife that is better than the knife that you just happen to prefer. So I thought that was also very, very refreshing that guys that are very knowledgeable and they're providing feedback and helping people, new people select knives in the kitchen knife world. They've got super high-end knives and they have no issue saying, you know what, you're just getting started, you don't have a lot of skill, you don't have a lot of money in your budget. This is the best knife you can pick within this range. And there's nothing wrong with this knife. It'll do everything that you want it to do and then some. That was just a very refreshing thing to see. So I look forward to hearing what you guys' thoughts are. Like I said, please go out, do some of your own research, look into some of these things yourself. I would just love to hear some feedback from you all. I appreciate you all watching, and remember, a lazy man carries a shell knife.